What is up, theology nerds? This is Tripp, and you're listening to the Theology Nerd Podcast. It is conveniently named that so that you don't use your brain juice deciding what may or may not happen in this podcast. You save it for your reading tonight, or maybe to enjoy the nerdiness that's about to go down today on the podcast. You're going to get to hear from Ryan Simmons. That's right, philosopher, Pentecostal philosopher of phenomenology himself. You're going to hear from Lauren Winner. Oh yeah, she's on the podcast, and so is Ryan Newsome, because we were hanging out, having fun in the mountains of North Carolina at the Progressive Youth Ministry Conference. I love PYM. That's its shorthand, the initials, Progressive Youth Ministry Conference. I love it every year. Tons of fun, amazing people. It's exactly what you think it would be. It would be like a bunch of youth ministers getting together, and they're youth ministers who are progressive youth ministers, which means they want you to love Jesus and the planet and take care of the poor and welcome and accept everybody. And their primary focus is not true love waits and penal substitutionary atonement. So it's always fun to get together with them, and we've been doing the podcast at PYM for a while. If you're a youth minister or you know one, then you should go ahead and use the Google. Type in Progressive Youth Ministry so you can go ahead and get your ticket for next year. It's always great. Amazing people. And it's well worth going to. Especially if you're at a church where you're a youth minister and you have to go to a conference or the money disappears, then go to this one because the people are legit. Well, we're going to have some fun in this podcast episode. This is kind of like the highlights of it because, you can't put the entirety of the live experience in a repetitious fashion that could just be downloaded and listened over and over. You can't capture the energy of a room of youth ministers. So this is what's going to go down. First, I want to let you know that if you're ready to have some fun this summer, then you should come to Theology Beer Camp. That's right, Peter Rollins and I are doing beer camp, Theology Beer Camp in Denver, and then in Oklahoma City in August. That's right. You should come to Homebrewed Christianity or go to theologybeercamp.com, find out more details, get your tickets, and reserve your spot for high time craft nerdiness, excellent local beverages, grub conversations with friends new and old. If you were saying to yourself, I wonder who it is that listens to Homebrewed Christianity, where are the theology nerds? Then you go to beer camp, you meet them, you become friends because you get to have some drinks, have some talks, have some conversation, maybe some karaoke late in the evening, maybe smoke a cigar and talk it out till early a.m. Who knows what's going to happen? I do, actually. Well, I know part of it. I at least know what's on the schedule. But it's secret. You'll find out more later. Anyway, Theology Beer Camp this August. First, we're going to be in Denver, then in Oklahoma City. Be there. Last, if you're a youth minister, we just launched a youth ministry video series on open and relational youth ministry. It has a Facebook group, so all the youth ministers who are thinking about how you lead as a youth minister, how you deal with parents, deal with youth, how you different tactics for communicating, facilitating, organizing, confirmation, all kinds of stuff. I'm making some videos. I'll be sharing them. We'll also be getting input from everyone that's there. And I hope to build a community of those of you that are working with students so you don't feel alone, so that you always have new ammo and inspiration to bring into things. And the other part of it is, I think that I just really enjoy hanging out with youth ministers. So I think the coolest. That's right. And now that I'm teaching full-time, I'm not technically a youth minister anymore, so it's not just self-serving to say youth ministers are the coolest. Now I just mean it from the heart. And I don't even have a kid that's in youth group yet. This is just sheer love. Sheer love. Anyway, this is the live podcast from Progressive Youth Ministry. Our friends, the Center for Process Studies, were sponsoring that live podcast. They brought in delicious beer from local breweries, and we enjoyed it all. It all disappeared as we were having ourselves a nerdy old time. So, without further ado, you're about to get zapped right into that live experience where the one and only Tony Jones is co-hosting with me, and you're gonna enjoy it. All right, I'll see you soon. Make sure you share this with the peoples. share it, and holler at Twitter. I love Twitter, at Tripp Fuller. And until next time, smoochy boochies. So,
it's like you build the crowd up and then you're like, and here's the phenomenologist. Well, and everyone's like,
is that not an exciting
holy
enough
crap.
word?
Why? Yeah.
Phenomenology
it's cricket. Just listen. Listen. Just listen to the room. Phenomenology.
Woo! I got student loans for a seminar.
Phenomenology. So you've written all these books.
Look at that.
Most of them.
Look at that.
Look at that. It is impressive. Your mom's proud.
She is. She has a copy of every one of them.
Re-examining deconstruction and determinate religion toward a religion with religion.
I don't know if we got there, but we moved toward it.
Well,
all right. So, first of all,
what's a phenomenologist?
Yeah, what the hell is phenomenology?
So phenomenology is a philosophical movement that is committed to a method of paying very close attention to the way the world gives itself to us. So if I'm looking...
Whoa. The way the world gives itself to us? Are you saying like the world has agency and it is doing something?
I'm saying that rather than thinking of the world as a thing out there and my mind in here, the world is occurring in so much as I am thinking it. So it is given to me. It's a technical word.
But is the world that other thing that's giving itself to you, or is it your mind that's like interpreting the whole everything you experience in such a way that it seems like it's giving itself to you?
Both.
Oh, yeah. There's a professor answer.
Yeah, so phenomenology is basically, I would say, a philosophical way of paying very close attention to what we perceive.
So tell us some big names in phenomenology.
Big names.
Big names that like maybe we would have heard of in college or grad school.
The ones that have the most letters?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, no, like important names.
So the founder of phenomenology is a guy named Edmund Husserl. He then had a student named Martin Heidegger.
We got some head nods.
I'm seeing some head nods.
Heidegger, yep. We see some nods.
Y'all are clearly not Pentecostals. That's what I'm gathering so far. Martin Heidegger was one of his students, probably the most influential phenomenologist.
Smart dude.
And then after him, we had people like Maurice Merleau-Ponty.
Okay,
obviously.
Which sounds much cooler if you go E at the end.
Mostly Germans, but you threw in a Frenchman right there.
French, Jean-Paul Sartre, you may have heard of. We have people like Jacques Derrida, who was mentioned in one of the breakout sessions today, which I made sure to tell the speaker that there you go. We got Derrida on the table for you. A guy that I do most of my work on is Emmanuel Levinas. And then there's a bunch of recent French phenomenologists that don't get a lot of attention that I think are actually most relevant to people in ministry, especially in Christian ministry. People like Jean-Luc Marion, Jean-Louis Chrétien, Michel Henry, Jean-Yves Lacoste. So a lot of French stuff going on.
Where are the American names? Give us some American names.
He just named half the Christians in France. That's what
You want me to give you a hat that says "Make Phenomenology Great Again"?
Yes, let's do that.
Tweetable phenomenology.
Hashtag right here. Yeah, there are a lot of American phenomenologists, but they tend to be commenters on the stuff that's going on in France.
They're more humble,
I guess. There's also different trajectories in phenomenology, and so most of the stuff that I'm referring to is in the existential or hermeneutic vein. Mm-hmm. The American phenomenologists tend to be doing a lot of work with cognitive science, and so the brain structures of receiving the world. So there's different veins that then we would talk about different spaces. A lot of Danish work going on in that too.
All I know is that a lot of us have mainline Protestant MDiv degrees. And
you couldn't get in the Pentecostal seminary?
Yeah. So on the book tour, I had one podcast listener at a Pentecostal megachurch be like, I can sell a lot of your books. Just only talk about this 3 pages of the book. The rest of it they'll be offended by. But I preached the shit out of it for 45 minutes at 3 services. Praise the Lord.
And clapped on 2 and 4, I bet.
It's amazing. So
we have rhythm. Yes, we do.
I had this question at
we have
every
rhythm. How
Q&A.
about Episcopals?
And the preface statement was something like, I'm a spirit-filled Christian, or I've had my second baptism, or something that says, you had a number of words with more syllables than I'm comfortable with connected to Germany or France. And I don't know if you're one of me, so I'm going to preface this. I didn't hate everything you said, but... Yeah. And then they say, honestly, the best parts you said I learned in Sunday school. What have you actually gained by attaching footnotes to it from dead people? And so, like, as a Pentecostal who does phenomenology, which is like a niche market for philosophers, I like it. I'm just saying, like, the Pentecostal overlapping Venn diagram of phenomenology, like it's like you.
There are like 3 of us, man.
Oh, there's 3.
Come on.
Is anyone surprised?
That's right.
That
Trinity
is like
even
a
shows
vestige
up there.
of the Trinity if I've ever heard one.
Pneumatological imagination.
So you tell me, like, if you were sitting there and you just said, I love Levinas to a bunch of Pentecostals who were like, what's the phenomenology? Is that like glossolalia for demons? And you're trying to explain your vocation. Like, what's the touch point?
Yeah, So I don't see myself as a phenomenologist because I'm a Pentecostal or as a Pentecostal phenomenologist. I'm a phenomenological philosopher who also happens to be raised and still takes very seriously my Pentecostal heritage. Now, I do think that, in particular, Pentecostalism has a deep resonance with phenomenology because, as I understand it, so phenomenology, again, is concerned with lived experience, engaging the world, receiving the way the world presents itself to me.
Let me stop you right there before we get to the Pentecostalism. How was that different from what was from the trajectory of philosophy before Husserl, Heidegger, Gadamer, and then all the Frenchmen you talked about?
Hold on. Like, if he answers this clearly, it will save you about $20,000 of student loans.
So, like,
and if you like 3 sentences of it, save it and drop it next time someone gives you shit. You're like, you haven't even examined this under a nice, phenomenological reduction. And they're like...
Because I do want to hear a definition of reduction, but so philosophy is cruising along, doing blah, 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 and then there's this rupture, and phenomenology comes along and, like, messes it all up. So, like, tell us what was that, and then what caused that rupture before we get to phenomenology and Pentecostalism, which I want to get to, but I want everybody, like, there with you when we get to it.
Yeah, so prior to phenomenology emerging on the scene, basically we have an inheritance of German idealism that had sort of sucked the air out of the room, and then reactions. So this is 18th century. People like Immanuel Kant, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and they had a sort of existential reaction against them because they were really concerned, as idealists are likely to be, with ideals and reason. And so the embodied reaction to that were people like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, the sort of founders of existentialism. So there was this big debate basically between those who saw philosophy as a type of rationalistic discourse and those who saw philosophy as a sort of lived experience in the world. Okay. Phenomenology shows up and says, you're both right.
Oh, really? How so?
So
like, how does phenomenology marry? So it's like ideas versus experience, and phenomenology says yes.
Says yes. Because
it's a group hug.
30 sentences or less.
I'll give it to you in one. So ideas are always emergent only as a result of experiencing the world that produces them. Period.
Snap. 1 sentence, bro.
I gotta drop something.
That's a very tweetable response. I almost doubt you being a philosopher.
I don't know if I can.
Exactly the same.
I can't say it.
440 characters or less.
Yeah. So we have ideas of the world. These ideas traditionally were where truth and universal things happen. What phenomenology does is says ideas are ultimately only results of experiencing stuff. And the stuff we experience, we don't then have an idea of it such that I have a representation of this chair in my mind. No, I have the experience of the chair. So when I experience the chair, what happens is the idea that I have of the chair is only possible because that experience engaging it. because I sit in it, because I kick it when I'm mad. I don't know if you kick chairs, but it's
that's what the dog's for.
You mean the dog's for kicking the chair? That's
exactly.
What you mean.
The dog peed on the chair.
Everything got way meta.
Okay.
I'm struggling following it.
So you hear this a lot. Like, I listen to a few different philosophy podcasts, and they're always like, Heidegger was the most brilliant philosopher of the 20th century.
He was
After
also
Alfred
an
North Whitehead.
anti-Semitic Nazi.
Yeah,
yes.
of course, he was also that. But Luther hated the Jews, and we tend to overlook that.
Somehow Germans get the best escape clause to the worst things.
What did Heidegger say in this marriage of idea and experience that was so revolutionary that it changed the trajectory of philosophy?
So prior to Heidegger, the dominant idea was that subjectivity, or the self that we try to be, is something that is separate from the world in which we find ourselves. Heidegger, in fact, says that we shouldn't even use the term subject anymore because it's always a thing over and against an object. So I am a subject because I have the object best-selling book in front of me within the series.
The subject-object distinction.
The subject-object split, which we all understand and we all say yes to every time we say just be yourself when you go on a first date. The idea then that Heidegger offers is he says, no, don't even use that word. He gives us a fancy German word which will make you all sound very smart at your next cocktail party. Dasein.
Oh, I love the Dasein. That's like a nice bottled water from the Coca-Cola company.
That's right. And the cool thing about Dasein...
It actually is.
Coca-Cola has water called Dasein?
If you spell it differently.
Okay, everybody, Lauren Winner is up here.
Got sick of me texting him questions.
Lauren has been texting me questions about
Lauren Winner,
phenomenology.
everyone give her a hand.
Like, just get your ass in the chair and ask the question.
Dasein is defined as being there. So the idea is we are always in a world, we're in a context. We can't make sense of ourselves except as a product of the sense that has been made of us. And so that's why Heidegger is such a big deal, is because he fundamentally changes how we think about selfhood.
Okay. Wait, Lauren has a question.
I would like to know the difference between writing a phenomenology and writing a memoir.
That's
a good question.
Says the memoirist.
The difference would be
cells. One of them is cells.
Tripp said something earlier about he wrote these instead of his dissertation because he got paid to write them. And I was like, man, I've written a lot of books and have gotten paid for none of them. So we have got to fix that.
But with our powers combined, we can be very mediocre.
This is true. When we add up to a 5. So a memoir doesn't necessarily, the way I would put it, doesn't necessarily require a particular methodology relative to what counts as evidence. So you live and then you talk about your living. For phenomenology, you talk about your living in a very specific philosophical way. The most non-technical way I can describe that is you are never concerned with what is the case for you as you, but you're concerned with what is the case for you as an experiencing being. So we're concerned with the essence of the thing that we experience, rather than giving into a sort of self-absorbed concern with my own life. One of the attributes of experience is that it's always one's own. So for us, we're always going to reflect on it at that meta level, which I think is why it makes it way less interesting to read, but also allows for a rigor that would then produce a kind of critical discourse in relationship to it, because the evidence offered has to be evidence as such, rather than evidence just because it happens to be yours.
So can you, do a reduction as an example? Can you just, give us a reduction of prayer or a reduction of the cup?
Yeah. Well, a cup, that's first phenomenological reduction. Prayer would be only after the second.
You're down a little bit. Yeah.
Explain, first of all, what's this process of reduction? Why is it so important?
So there are ultimately 4 reductions, but the idea is this, that we start off just engaging the world. So all of you are drinking your beers or your iced tea, since I'm a cider fan myself. And when you are drinking your beers, you're not usually reflecting on the status of this experienced object. You're instead just drinking your beer. You're engaging it.
Drink the beer.
So the idea is it's just on hand for you. You're using it without reflecting on it as a used object. So the first reduction strips away all of our taken for grantedness about the engagement in the world and allows us then to reflect on it in a way that is not now obvious. So it's like when I got married early enough that thankfully I don't do these things now, but I remember on one date
That's a preface statement for a lot of stories.
A lot of stuff. Well, I was on a date and I remember sitting, it was at an Outback restaurant.
You are classy, baby, all the way. Woo! Did you get the bloomin' onion?
Not a sponsor.
When Chung gets bloomin'.
So we're sitting at this restaurant, and I remember saying to her, well, how do you know that this is, in fact, a steak?
Is this the one you married?
No, we never went on another date. But had she been sufficiently phenomenologically reduced...
Things never tell another person.
Never.
If you were significantly phenomenologically reduced.
That's right. Well, but the idea is, right, when you eat your steak, you eat your steak, or you use your knife, or you sit in your thing. The idea is we engage the world without this reflective move. What phenomenology starts by doing in the first reduction is it strips away all of these theoretical backdrops or baggages that we bring with us.
There's 4 reductions. He's still on the first.
All right, so look. There is a cup in front of us.
Lauren's move was this. And I kept, like, when you, what was, I don't remember the line, but it was like something about like, oh, well, you know, like teenagers are like they can't do really metanoia. They're going to make decisions that they regret. And then you went like this. And it made me think of, as a youth minister, one time they videotaped me and I didn't know. And there's some app where it adds sparkles for movement. And I thought to myself, like, if metanoia, when you said it, because you're like thinking of how many different ways can I say this? Because I know they don't know what I mean, but I know they know what I mean. But they have to like connect the existential experience of going like, teenagers don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. And yet, you know they're going to change and regret it later, but I can't talk to them directly. And so you went like this. And I remember those moments as a youth minister where you're going, yeah, I can't say half of what I'm going to say. You aren't ready to hear it yet, but I want to tell you, but don't worry, later in life, you're going to trust me. And then they had this app where they put like sparkles every time movement was on the video. And I did this like talk about Heidegger.
I bet that sparkled.
And in it, I said, it was the first time I did it. I'd never used the words again, like, cause there's nothing like saying like being towards death to a bunch of teenagers.
Saying
then,
it in German makes it.
And then you're like trying to explain the difference between Heidegger authenticity and inauthenticity, and then the structure of care and Dasein and all that kind of stuff. And what he means by mood is different than normal moods, but there are 3 different like located forms of knowing. And then like the 14-year-old's like, and I'm like,
see, you should have told the dating story.
Yeah. So like, I failed so bad, but one kid was totally into it, and she's like, that was the coolest thing I've ever heard. So then like, I basically like repeat it to her to figure out what words she used, and then would use that in the future. So Heidegger, who does a second reduction in phenomenology, who's like, it's not just like reducing things to things as they give themselves. Mm-hmm. It's reducing things to things that they give themselves in your situatedness and in your finitude. Because every human being is thrown into the world, and you all know that if you were thrown in Saudi Arabia, we'd be a progressive Muslim youth ministry event right now. And you know that. At least we hope that's there. And then like if you were like in... if you know you're going to die, and most of what you do is structured ways of denying your impending death, it's like the moment you connect those dots, like you're ready to hear a story about like a homeless dude in the first century. But so like she's like, here's what I heard, and here's why I do this. I'm like, do you want to read the introduction to Being in Time? And
no.
She said, I guess.
No.
So then I took all the words, used it the next year in confirmation. So then when I get up in next year in confirmation, and I'm like using what basically she said, and it gets to being towards death, and she said, well, being towards death, the fact that all of us try to come up with meaning in the face of our impending finitude, like after reading the thing we're talking about, she goes, it's kind of like when you're a teenager, you go, why are we all born to suffer and die and no one wants to talk about it? Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh shit, I'm not allowed to ask that question because I need your parents to tithe. And so this is a really long aside connected to they made a video where I go, why are we all born just to suffer and die and no one wants to talk about it? And they put it on like a stinking loop with little sparkles coming out. And I was like, that's the second reduction in phenomenology. And I only remembered that because of when Lauren was doing that, and I was like, I know exactly what you're saying. And if it was videoed by my teenagers, they would have added this weird-ass app where sparkle confetti came out. And then they would mock you explaining the second reduction in phenomenology. I'm sorry, that was an aside.
Yeah. All right. I can wave my hands a bunch while I do it.
Yeah, but they don't have the app. They're students.
Here's a cup. The fact that I'm now saying, hey, pay attention to this cup has now brought this cup out of its invisibility as the thing that I was drinking. Like right now, if all of you think about the fact that you're chewing or that you're swallowing, suddenly we've now got a different attention that we're paying. That's the first reduction, is that we stop just existing in the world and we start reflecting on it outside of our theories that let it become obvious.
Someone says, oh man, my nose is so itchy. And then you're like,
everyone's nose.
My nose is kind of itchy too. Right? Okay, so that's a
strange example, but okay. Are you, was that a really complicated way of just wanting to scratch your nose and justify it?
So that's the first reduction?
The first reduction, so now we are not just engaging the world, we're thinking about it. We're reflecting on it as philosophers.
Thinking is an act of engagement, not of just reflection.
The second move, and here Tripp is right, though I'm going to say it slightly differently. The second reduction that I would describe is the reduction that says it's not just now something that is not theory-laden and an object that we're reflecting on. It's now the thing that is only immanent to my consciousness. So here's what that means. That's a weird way to put it. None of you are actually seeing a cup. I don't know if you can see it over there. What you're seeing is a slice of a cup. You're only ever perceiving a side of a thing. I don't know if you have a back, because I don't see your back. So what we do is we're only now, as phenomenologists, focusing in on what is actually given to our consciousness as internal to that process. So this is a weird move, because I don't perceive you as a slice. I perceive you as a person or as a full cup. Mm-hmm. But now we fill it in, and so now we're talking about our mind doing the work to make sense of the world for us. Third reduction.
Hold on. When you're doing it with teenagers, you say this. How many of you have had experiences of the sacred in which that experience became authoritative because of an oppressive story they told you was true? The experience is genuine, the taste is real, and yet attached to it is the back of the cup called homophobia, patriarchy, hierarchy, American empire, and white supremacy. And so like that, you want to affirm the actual experiences your teenagers have in their life of the sacred, and you teach them high quality phenomenology, as one does, is to say like, the affirmation of the experience means you don't have to attend to the baggage of it that we all like to complain about. Because sometimes the backside is where shit sneaks in. And that's the second reduction. Or comes out.
So,
look, this is a podcast. It's improvisational, philosophical, theological theater. I'm not saying if you preach it, you don't.
Was this eschatological or scatological? I'm confused.
All right,
come on.
The difference.
Oh,
that's right.
Let's go to the third reduction.
Reduction.
Who wants to hear the third reduction?
Oh, I'm excited.
Now it's going to get hard.
I just want you to know I plan actual youth ministry relations.
The first two reductions are easy. Third is the hard shit.
Third reduction is that we then realize, wait a minute, and this is what Tripp was referring to about Heidegger, this cup that I'm engaging is not just a cup that I see, it's also a cup because I find myself in a sociocultural space that lets it be cup instead of flower pot, instead of car or puppy dog. So the third reduction is, you might say, throwing us back into our social spaces such that we can receive things as it turns out we do. Fourth reduction.
Oh,
this one's pretty badass. So the fourth reduction.
It's true.
Is, now wait a minute. It's not just that I am presented or given this cup, but I have to first be presented with givenness as such. So there has to be the possibility.
You have to say that slowly, because not everyone owes money because they learn that. So like say
I have a lot of it. The possibility that we could see a cup is itself a question that has to be asked and interrogated before we then interrogate what it means to see the cup. But we start with the cup, because there it is. And then we eventually work to the point where we say, wait a minute, but what are the very conditions of revelation? And the conditions of revelation make possible the revelation that I have been inquiring into for the first three reductions. So this is why, methodologically, I'm pretty sure memoirists are not concerned with the phenomenality of given phenomena. However, at the level of what's produced, I actually think it's not just similar to memoirs, but also similar to testimonies. I'm a Pentecostal. The way that we witness or that we testify, what we're saying is, here is a phenomena, here's a revelation that is real for me. And we try to make sense of that reality and then live into it. And I think ultimately phenomenology, better than any other philosophical tradition that I know of, helps us make sense of what we do when we do things. And that, I think, is a big deal.
I just want you to know that in knowing we were youth ministers hanging out drinking, I was going to avoid all of the reductions and ask you other questions. But now I am inspired to ask a couple questions that
there's not a fifth
afterwards. One. No, there's not a fifth reduction until the eschaton. But no, here. So, like all the questions I had are normal questions. This is just so enticing, and I want to ask this.
All right,
you're a Pentecostal.
Yeah, we still haven't talked about that.
I know, but. The like when you get to the end of the reductions, it does this move, which I think every youth minister wishes everyone else in their congregation thought was true. That the experiences that the teenagers have and that you have as a person of faith are the actual location of your reflection, as opposed to you go to church and participate in a community to learn a framework that you then impose on your experiences.
Yes.
Now, phenomenology in your history moment was resisting two different characters, which are the trajectories of the two different versions of liberal theology, all discussed at previous PYMs with very famous liberal theologians. And it's like liberal theology out of Hegel and liberal theology out of Kant. Now, let's imagine those people thought all those dead Germans were complicated and really boring, and they didn't think it had anything to do with what they were trying to do as ministers. But they're like, I guess we have to pick Hegel or Kant because, I don't know, liberal nerds said you're supposed to, or whatever. You're a Pentecostal. Like, you hang out with people that read the Bible on purpose, not on accident, like because you have to preach. You pray because it's natural. Not because your evangelical friend is having lunch with you and you're like, I can still do this. I mean, it's slightly oppressive because there's a certain teleological oppressive commitment towards prayer that essentializes our experiences in one monologue. But, I mean, I could do it. I mean, I don't call Jesus Savior and Lord, but I kind of mean it. You know, so, like, if phenomenology, I find to be one of those like moments or places that reframe the what did you say? It reframes the beginning point so that you and I and Tony we have a mutual friend, Peter Rollins. Like, we have a Molt Maniac. Like, Lauren's like a Duke professor.
She's a Hauerwasian.
She doesn't know that she's the Pope of the Hauerwasian Mafia. We don't have to discuss that now.
It's true.
And you're a Pentecostal, and like I'm like none of that. Like I'm like Claremont Team Process. Like the fact that I don't put a word between Jesus and Christ makes me the fundamentalist on campus. So why is it that phenomenology gives us an assertion that this is where we do ministry, where we do theology, where we think about our faith? That means that the four of us would hang out and go like, that little sliver of connection is more important than the 90% that a lot of our friends who are philosophers and theologians don't have in common, where they're like, maybe God is real, I don't know. Maybe God does stuff, I don't know. Phenomenology really like harnesses like God doing shit.
Wait, stop.
Collaborate.
Can you please do the 4 reductions on that question? Because it was like 10-minute long question.
Well, I got distracted because
it didn't end in a question.
I'm gonna. So here's what I hear you saying.
That a boy.
That's what I tell my students all the time. Why is it phenomenology lets the four of us be able to find a space of engagement rather than starting at positions of difference?
Yeah, how? Because liberal theology wants to get to a point where you have an objective place where you begin theology. Your historical Jesus, your like shitty version of religion where everyone's included and no one is actually really included because it's a generic thing. Or like, oh, we have experience. What is about it? I don't know. We want to be so inclusive, we say nothing.
So look,
and like a phenomenology goes, what an oppressive question. Why don't we try something different?
Yeah, let me put it this way, maybe in a memoir-ish way. So this past week, I had dinner with one of the most important and influential atheistic philosophers of religion working in the field today.
At Outback?
It was not at Outback. And
that bloomin' onion.
We had dinner together, and here was what was interesting. So he is a non-naturalist atheist, and I am a Pentecostal Christian, and we're both professional philosophers of religion. And what we discovered was, I think, a phenomenological realization, which is we are both united in the mystery and complexity and messiness and excess of experience itself. So he talked about the fact that he had experiences in his life that made his atheism something that was uncomfortable for him for a long time. And I talked to him about the fact that I have experiences that make my Christianity uncomfortable for me at a lot of the times. And so we actually started by saying we have different interpretations of the same phenomena. He doesn't think that there is actual religious phenomena. I think as a phenomenologist that there is possibly religious phenomena, but as a Pentecostal, that possibility becomes actualized.
But like, youth ministry is dealing with a group of people where messiness and excess is an assumption.
Yeah, and that's why
every
helps.
youth minister should be a phenomenologist, even though I'm professionally a metaphysician. So, like, I want you to make the case.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to genuinely attend to the experiences? Like, the messiness, the excess of experience, when that's your focus and not the tradition or your enlightened progressive commitments or your identity politics or all those other things become your lens. If you are attending to the messiness and excess of the experience, how does that free you? Like, I mean, you teach at a very, like at school, it gets people from all over the place.
Right.
When they walk in and they're like, oh, a Pentecostal theologian talking about philosophy and blah, 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 blah. He probably wants me to think the earth was made in 6 24-hour days. And then like you have like this other person like, life is meaningless. This is crazy. And then they all of a sudden are like, he's not an idiot. Like, what's the phenomenological like breakthrough gap place?
Let me put it this way. I'll say this in a deeply non-philosophically fancy way. I think part of the complexity that we face right now in this country is the inability to start with a commonality of experience that then allows us to make sense of a difference of interpretation of that experience. We're all embodied, we're all living, we're all messy, and the ease with which our theological starting points or our metaphysical starting points allow us then to dismiss the view of the person that we are engaging acts as if those people aren't also bodies in the world. And so if we start with the sharedness of embodied lived reality that is always going to be more than any story we tell about it, but at least trying to be articulated in the stories we tell, if we can at least do that, then I don't think we can move forward very well. And this is why I don't see myself as a theologian at all, because I am concerned with a very rigorous philosophical approach that doesn't assume anything like revelation and the actuality of it or the truth of Christianity or my specific view on the eschaton. None of that stuff affects the way that I start by saying, you know what? We all see a cup. None of you saw a puppy dog. Now we've got something to talk about. Now, we probably are going to have to talk about more than cups and puppy dogs. But as soon as we start there, the bodies in the world become the sites not of contestation over reproductive rights or certain sexual behaviors, but they become the space where we can recognize those interpretive frames are nested in their own social histories. There are reasons why those are the debates we're having rather than other debates. And that, I think, is something that we say in my Pentecostal churches can preach.
Okay. Last question.
You got to woo at the Progressive Youth Ministry about Pentecostal preaching.
Okay, last question. Years and years ago, I took like a church van full of mainline not liberal, but like centrist, mainline Christian kids from confirmation class to a Rick Kua concert. Anybody remember?
Amazing bass player. I've seen him live.
Right? Okay, Rick Kua.
Yeah,
Pentecostal bass player. It was just Rick Kua and a bass and then like a soundtrack.
Yeah.
He had no band with him.
That's right.
Okay? At a Pentecostal
I also
church.
had a colleague in grad school who was a bass player, and he would do spoken word Nietzsche recitations to bass.
Okay.
That's
freaky,
amazing.
Right? Okay, so we're at a Rick Kua concert.
YouTube didn't exist.
We're at a Rick Kua concert at a Pentecostal church with a bunch of mainline kids. At the end of the Rick Kua concert, he does an altar call. Of course, my entire youth group goes forward. Okay? They take because you're right, of course. They take them into a back room. I'm sitting out there twiddling my thumbs. We did not yet have mobile phones, so I couldn't be, Googling shit. And I'm just sitting there, and then all of a sudden, one girl, Megan, comes running out crying. She's freaking out. What's going on back there, Megan? What's so wrong? She says, they're trying to teach us to speak in tongues. I open the door to the back room, and pardon me for the name of the church I grew up at, Colonial Church. If we had to do it now, we'd call it Post-Colonial Church. I was like, all kids from Colonial Church in the church van now. And they all come out and they're freaking out. So we're sitting in the church van in the Pentecostal church parking lot. I'm like, okay, well, I'm debriefing the experience. Like, what did you experience inside the Pentecostal church? And they're like, they told us to say spaghetti-o, spaghetti-o, spaghetti-o over and over and over until it turned into tongues. And then that would be
So you want to raise your voice on the last word so it becomes a question?
So what I'm asking is, convince a bunch of progressive liberal Protestants
of the reality of glossolalia?
Yes.
Wow.
Go.
So look, I have never spoken in tongues. So most of the Pentecostals in my tradition would actually say that I am then not spirit-filled. I have a big tent conception of Pentecostal. Here's the thought. If we affirm a relational God who is so canonically concerned about us in our personhood that God would in fact take on meatness, right? The carne becomes flesh like us. Why would we think that the relationship to God wouldn't be something that continues to be embodied? Well, I think we do. And in fact, a lot of us do this when it comes to the sacraments of Eucharist and different sorts of things, that there's an embodiedness, an ingesting of the divine. Well, the way I see glossolalia is, what sense would it make if God were bodily present to me, that my body could somehow handle that relative to a syntax and semantics that is contingently historically created? It seems that what would happen is my physical abilities would rupture, just like they do in every single mystical text in all of the world's religious traditions. And one way that it might yield is a kind of radical silence. Another way it might yield is a similarly apophatic result, which is the overflow or excessiveness of discourse. So both of those are not meaningless, but so meaningful that they are not intelligible then when brought back to the domain of just rational discourse and reason giving and argumentation. So I think spaghettio is a disaster, because I don't think this then makes any sense as a, let me teach you how to talk this language. But at the level of phenomenological possibility, dismissing the idea that God can be embodily revealed to us and so intimate, more even than we are to ourselves, which is, I think, ultimately the idea of Jesus living in your heart, I think that's phenomenologically robust. Jesus lives in us. If we start there, then the silliest thing I could think of is the idea that we would be able to give a rational metaphysical discourse about it. Better, it seems, that we would do like the vast majority of the world's religious adherents do, and they fall on their face or their hands go up. Their body literally cannot contain what it is that, in fact, has now been given to them. So as far as I'm concerned, I would say part of the danger of the mainline traditions, and I say that as somebody who goes now to a Methodist church, because my Pentecostal churches, and they kept kicking me out. And my pastor said, come here, we'll take anybody.
An allergy to reductions.
Right. It didn't work out too well. It turns out it wasn't that. It was challenging the gender essentialism and homophobia and stuff. That didn't work well. But the idea is, I would say that the mainline starting points sometimes, certainly not always, are so sympathetic to a certain foundationalism of liberal theology that it doesn't open us up to being interrupted by the very canonic God that we claim to take seriously.
Amen.
So I think the same could be said in the other direction. I don't call myself evangelical anymore. Trump effed that up. But those of us from that background, I think, also become so closed-minded to the liberal move because we assume that if we were to slide there, what happens is we have to then abandon our whole interpretive frame. And if we start by saying, no, we're both starting in places, and it matters that we start in places, but what's really cool about the idea of an actual religious phenomena that we call revelation, especially in the person of Christ, that throws all of us for a loop. And so when we are thrown for a loop, the fact that our words would fail, that's just good Thomistic thought. That doesn't have to be crazy Rick Kua stuff. That can just be really, really good classical theology, now expressed as the overflow or excess or absence of words.
Excellent. Woo!